Good afternoon, everyone. This is Nina Stack, President of the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers. I'm very pleased that you could join us today for our funder briefing on Atlantic City. And I'm really so grateful that John Emge, the Vice President and Regional Executive Director of the United Way of Greater Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey, has helped us to put this briefing together for you. I think there may be some other folks who will be joining us as we get underway. And as I mentioned, we are recording this, and it'll be available for our members behind the member curtain of our website so that people can listen in. We have John is going to be facilitating the discussion for us, and we have three speakers joining us. Andrea Steinberg, CEO of Jewish Family Service, the Reverend David McGettigan, pastor of the St. Andrews by the Sea Church and Vice Chair and Treasurer of the Atlantic City Long-Term Recovery Group, and Fran Wise, Director of Community Investments for Atlantic and Cape May counties from the United Way of Greater Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey. It's my real pleasure. John is a wonderful colleague to work with. He is Vice President and Regional Executive Director, overseeing the United Way's work in Southern New Jersey, having previously served as Executive Director of the United Way in Atlantic County for 13 years and leading the United Way in Cape May County since 2011. And John really was key and masterful in helping to work together to bring the United Ways together under the one umbrella of Greater Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey, and has been quite proficient in fundraising and in impact in the work that you've done there with the United Way. So, John, thank you so much for doing this for us, and we've got a lot of good information that you're going to share, part of which we also sent out a white paper to everyone who had registered before the call. I know you're going to talk about some of the things that are raised in that, and our speakers will address that as well. So I'll turn it over to you, John.
Very good. Thank you, Nina. And hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to have this as a topic, although if there's been this Creative Atlantic City event today, I almost want to turn the microphone over to find out what's going on there. It sounds pretty exciting. Hopefully you all have received the Responding to Economic Crisis in Atlantic County piece that went out earlier today. Do want to call your attention to a typo in the second paragraph. We somehow tacked on an extra year, even though it seems like it's been 4 years, or almost 4 years, 3.5 years. It's only been 2.5 since Hurricane Sandy came through, so we had the wrong year there. It's 2012, not 2011. Lest you think that we don't know what day it is, but you know how those things happen. But really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thanks to Andrea and Reverend McGettigan, of course, Fran Wise for agreeing to be part of this presentation. So do want to touch on just a couple of things up front. You know, actually, yesterday would have been 15 years since I started working in Atlantic County as the executive director for United Way there. And
wow.
It's hard to believe. In 15 years' time, you know, the community has changed so much. Unfortunately, not in a positive way in the recent years since about 2006 and 2007 or so. But, you know, I got in there 2000, great guns. We were, you know, double-digit increases in our resources each year, giving great support to local agencies in the Atlantic County area. Casino industry was booming, building new buildings. Borgata comes on board, and Borgata built a second building, and then there's talk of even more growth. And then all of a sudden, as we all know, the economic slump occurred. And unfortunately, those junkets from New York City, all the Merrill Lynch people were no longer coming down to Atlantic City for the weekend, unfortunately. So things have changed since then. And, of course, increased competition has also created some challenges to the gaming business in Atlantic City. And as a result of that, you know, the hurricane came through in 2012, and that certainly changed our lives dramatically. Many in our community still not back to where they were pre-Sandy. And, business decisions had to be made. The first one to close its doors, the Atlantic Club, in early 2014 last year, and then in rapid succession, 3 additional casinos closed just after Labor Day, or around Labor Day this past summer. So in a very short order, over 6,000 individuals now unemployed from those jobs. Some of those jobs were part-time, we know, and fortunately, some of the casinos that have stayed open and are thriving now to some degree compared to last year. If you look at the monthly reports, they've hired some of these folks back, which is great. I think we heard about 2,000 folks have been picked up by the existing casinos, but that still leaves thousands of folks out of work. And, of course, this happened almost 6 months ago, so we're coming up to a bit of a watershed here for a really increased need that we're going to experience in the community when those 6-month unemployment benefits run out in about a month from now or so will be the bulk of the folks. So I know that Fran and Andrea, Dave will be talking about that more in specifics, but that's wanted to just be everyone to be mindful of that sort of we're looking at the storm, so to speak, upon us in very short order here. And so we're hoping to, we know we have already worked together to put together a coordinated response in the community to try to provide help to these households in the communities. If there was one benefit from the hurricane coming through 2.5 years ago, it was the fact that the community figured out, and I guess this happens, even though we hear about Katrina from other communities and how United Way or whatever organization have worked together to, you don't really think about it until it is on your door, but the community certainly learned that by working together in a concerted way, a coordinated way, that we were a lot more effective in responding to the needs, and I know that there's very few agencies can really hold a candle to the work that Andrea and JFS has done in the community on Absecon Island, helping those communities, helping those individuals and families out. So I'm sure she'll talk about that just a little bit. So we learned a lot from that experience, and when this came along, we thought, gee, we already have an infrastructure in place. The agencies are working together, and a lot of times we compete with one another for various resources, but here, post-Sandy, for a number of reasons, we've needed to work very closely together. And what we did at United Way was say, hey, let's keep the conversation going, refocus it a little bit. So we put together a kind of an agency summit, if you will, when the governor had his summit on Atlantic City later that week. We put together an agency summit and had a couple dozen organizations represented, and we had the mayor, John Guardian, there from Atlantic City, talking to us about what he was experiencing, what his thoughts were for working together in the community. And came out of there in a few subsequent meetings from then on a plan to put together a coordinated response. And that's the purpose of the white paper that we put out earlier today. And from there, I think I'd like to turn it over to Fran Wise, who will kind of start off the conversation with our guests. Fran?
Thanks, John. Andrea and Reverend McGettigan are both here with me now. They have survived the trip, so just to let you know that. So as John stated, as bad as Hurricane Sandy was, the lesson that we learned was that we have to work together. We needed to put together a coordinated team to respond to a disaster of this magnitude. So when we learned about the casino closings, we realized that not one agency or organization could respond. We needed all aspects of the health and human services spectrum working together. And one of the first things that we all agreed on was that we needed to be open and consistent with our communications. no one agency has enough resources or information, and we all needed to share, make sure that we all knew what was going on, what the new trends were, what the new resources or new programs that were out there, so that we could inform the people coming to us looking for help. We realized that our primary customer from the layoffs was going to be a family that had probably worked in the casinos for 20 years, one or both spouses. They lived probably paycheck to paycheck with small savings. They had a mortgage, they had children in the schools, and they had, household bills, as we all do. So we knew that we were looking at a different customer than the one that we had consistently served over as many years as these agencies have been in business. We do have county officials at the table, and they provide us with updates on the number of people in the county accessing food stamps and temporary assistance for needy family, emergency shelter assistance. And at our last meeting, the number was probably around 10,000 people. Looking at the statistics that we got from the Division of Gaming, there were about 6,800 people that worked at the 4 casinos that closed, and these are numbers back to July of 2014. And the other really scary statistic that we got from the Department of Labor is that from January 4th to the middle of July, there's going to be 4,700 people whose unemployment benefits will be exhausted, this is truly an economic disaster impacting so many people that live in Atlantic County. And even if you didn't work at the casinos themselves, you may have worked for the pizza shop that delivered lunch every day or another business that provided ancillary services. And we expect that the numbers of people that are going to be coming looking for assistance are going to be representative of those types of organizations and companies as well. So with regard to our economic summit work, we've been meeting since September, and at our first meeting, we identified the need for people to be able to connect with help. And this was important because, as I said earlier, a lot of these households are first-time users. They don't know where to go for assistance. And there were some job fairs, and some people attended those, but we identified 211 as an appropriate and convenient portal for people to call, finding out where to go for assistance. The 211 is New Jersey's information and referral resource. Pretty easy number. You get connected with a person. If you don't want to call, you can go on their website. You can type in what you're looking for, and they'll give you providers. But it's one number for people to remember. So one of the first things that we did was to set up a resource guide page with 211. If you go to their website, look, there's a page dedicated to unemployment assistance for people in the Atlantic County area, and it has a host of job training fairs, information fairs, information about unemployment, agencies that may have resources that can provide assistance. It's a pretty straightforward guide and a good starting point for someone looking for help. We also put together a task force for holiday giving. We began meeting in September, and Christmas, Thanksgiving, and Hanukkah assistance were right around the corner. So the Community Food Bank led that effort to make sure that whatever resources the community had were maximized, and that we could serve as many people that needed that extra help during the holidays as possible. There's also a tremendous food distribution effort that is still going on for people that were impacted by the layoffs. Another area of focus was around advocacy, and we actually met with members of the U.S. Department of Labor, Health and Human Services, and talked about the needs in Atlantic County and how we anticipated that they would continue to escalate. The other piece, as I said earlier, was outreach and awareness, how to get information to people, making sure that people could be easily connected with information. And we've been working with the school districts in the community to make sure that information goes home to the parents so that they can find out about low-income home energy assistance programs that might help keep the utility bills on after the March moratorium is over. So one difference that we are experiencing with this economic disaster as opposed to Hurricane Sandy is that after Hurricane Sandy hit, there was an outpouring of resources into the community. Natural disasters have a certain level of urgency, and people are very likely to respond to that. As we put together this coordinated response that I'm going to talk about in a second, it's evident that resources are needed in this community. So at a more specific level, what we're hoping to stand up very shortly is a coordinated response. We have identified providers, JFS, Jewish Family Services, the Atlantic City Long-Term Recovery Group, the Salvation Army, Catholic Charities, Family Service Association, and Atlantic Care Behavioral Health as providers who can disaster case manage, for lack of a better word, the families that have been impacted. We hope to use New Jersey 211 as a portal. So if you've been impacted by the casino closings, you call New Jersey 211 and they'll ask you where you live, what your specific needs are, and they'll connect you with one of these 6 providers who will help you navigate the system. Now, right now, all of the providers are using existing resources, which are already strapped. And with the 800 or so people that are going to be coming off unemployment in March, we anticipate a huge influx of those callers coming and looking for assistance. So our goal is to be able to make the connections with resources to individuals that need it and help stand up a coordinated response effort. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrea, and she and Reverend McGettigan can talk to you more about what they're seeing in the field.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for your time. Sorry to pop in late on the call. I want to start by saying, and not to go over the timeline that John and both Fran have outlined beautifully, but to talk about this area and that these 3 major changes to our area that we keep defining as people who we've never expected to use a system using a system. So in 2009, with the economic downturn that impacted the entire country, impacted this area. And at that point, JFS sort of redefined what we do. And we are always an agency to turn to, usually for those that are in marginal situations, people with serious and chronic mental illness, people that fall through the cracks. And what we found starting in 2009 is other people were falling through the cracks that we hadn't defined it in necessarily in our service population, at least to receive the kinds of services we're talking about here today. Then again, with the storm in 2012, again, we are defining a new population of people that hadn't needed our help before, and were in absolute crisis mode. And the community, as everybody has pointed out already, really came together to figure out how to put together a safety net for everybody that needed help. And we continue to do that. But again, you're just looking at this growing population of people that never needed help. And here we are again saying, here's a growing population of people that never needed help before. So we just continue to grow and evolve to meet the community needs, which, you know, as each of those defining moments have come and gone, we have figured out what we need to do in an ongoing way because it never goes back. And so JFS has really become, as other agencies in the area have become, first responders of sorts, and really just figuring out where we are as a community and what those needs will continue to be. So, for example, when the storm hit and our calls quadrupled in terms of basic need requests, really food and utilities and just having shelter, that number has never gone back, and now it increases again. So I think that what we're finding is that there are so many people with increased needs, and they never get back to baseline. And so we continue to have to support them in ways that we are able to get them back on their feet. We're not looking to be an organization that is looked to carry people through, but to try to help find long-term solutions. And it's a really challenging thing to do in a very small community with a lack of resources and quite frankly, a lack of options and opportunities for people. So our calls have really, again, increased, having never gone back to their original levels. We're getting anywhere from 15 to 25 calls a day. And for an organization of our size, and we are one of quite a few, that is a tremendous volume. Now, interestingly enough, the calls range in terms of the newer requests. Some people are beginning to just call because they're worried. And what are they going to do when their benefits run out? And so we're really talking not only about the basic needs or the coming basic needs, but how to support people through this crisis. We have built expertise in trauma, which at the time that we started it, we never imagined what the needs were going to be, and they just continue to grow. And in a sense, people are being re-traumatized over and over again in our area. So when people are calling and asking about what will I do when my benefits run out, it's really scratching the surface of what's really going on for them and their family. And so our intake workers and program case managers out in the field are finding that they're helping people to even understand the scope of the problems that they have or the challenges or the requests that they're going to need. People are so overwhelmed. Families are really in crisis. So we're really working to work with families to navigate a system, to understand what their benefits are, particularly for those that may have never been eligible for things in the past. And also recognizing that there's just a limit to eligibility and that they may not be able to get what some of the folks that we've served historically are able to get because they do have a serious mental illness and there is already a safety net built for them through state contracts and whatnot. So we as an organization, and certainly part of this response that Fran described, are really trying to figure out how to best serve the individuals in our community. And, of course, as Fran also pointed out, there's a lack of resources. So trying to help people without the dollars behind it is really a challenge and will continue to be a growing challenge for us. We leverage whatever we can, always have organizationally, and I think that most social service agencies do. If somebody is eligible for a program that exists at our agency, that's the first place we go. So we're not looking for new dollars to help situations that we have dollars to help. And so I think that JFS, one of many, is looking and saying, what do we have to bring to the table already? And how can we help people, and what else do we need, as opposed to defining this as a new problem and looking for, a dollar for each person for everything, all of their needs. We're saying this is what's already there, both through JFS and through the other organizations. And I'm here for 8 years, and I have to say this community is one that is so willing to work together, and I do not feel that people feel threatened by what others bring to the table. So we did learn a lot from the storm and learned how to work together even better, but I would say that in the social service arena, that's something that we've all done for a very long time, and we collaborate. And even if it's about getting a utility bill paid, if one of us can bring $200 and someone else can bring $200 and someone else can bring $200, if that's the way to get a bill paid, that's what we do. So we really work as closely as we possibly can to meet the growing needs that are being defined today. I don't have an easy answer. I'm sure none of you do, and none of us around the table today do. But I think that we have the energy and the expertise to bring to it if we could only define, that pot of money that might be able to help those individuals to just stay covering the most basic needs that they can, so they can rebuild. And whatever we help them to try to define what rebuilding is in this small community with lack of options and opportunities, I think is not only the job of those that are here today, but obviously the job of those at various summits and meetings throughout the city and the county. So I'm happy to be part of this and happy to add whatever other details you would like about the kind of direct service we are and will be doing in the future.
Andrea, thank you. It's Nina Stack. I want to thank you, and thanks for taking the time to join us. And I know we're going to hear from the Reverend as well. And I guess, John, one of the things I sort of am channeling what I imagine some of our members on the line are also wondering that they're clearly the basic needs to help people in this really, really challenging time. But then also, as we get deeper into the call, if there's a point where you might be able to share any of the plans for how to, the longer term from this disaster, of the recovery, the rebuilding. If we're talking about this in disaster terms, you know, there's the recovery and then there's the rebuilding. So at some point too, and it may be too soon for those discussions, but we'll see. But Fran, I'll turn it back to you, and you can introduce the Reverend, and then we're going to open it up for questions.
Sure. I'd like to introduce Reverend David McGettigan. He's the pastor of St. Andrews by the Sea Church, and he's also the vice chair and treasurer of the Atlantic City Long-Term Recovery Group.
I really appreciate this opportunity, along with the others, to speak to you today. And let me say a word about the rebuilding, following upon what has already been said. The people whom we're meeting who are in need, more and more we are seeing them scared because now push is coming to shove here and the benefits are going to run out. Some are already very dejected because of the triple or quadruple whammy that they've already suffered. As I like to tell the volunteers who came here to help with Superstorm Sandy, many of these folks were already living on the margins. They are working people who couldn't make ends meet on October 28th, 2012. They didn't need Sandy on October 29th, 2012. That just took them over the edge. You add that to the loss of the little bit of wealth that they may have accumulated in their homes because of the drop in the value of the homes, and thereby now they have untenable mortgages, and to the fact that the casino closings were not just a sudden phenomenon. Indeed, the doors slammed suddenly, but long before that, in the decline of the income and profits to the casinos, these are folks who had begun to live with a decline and a loss and a degradation of their earning capability, because the folks who managed the casinos had already pulled every trick out of the hat they could to lower wages, put people into part-time positions who had been working full-time, and reduce or eliminate benefits. So all of this is coming together now, and we're seeing a dejected population, some even demoralized at this point. Well, what's the hope for the future? What's the rebuilding? Well, we knew that we had jobs coming back. We knew, for example, Bass Pro Shops will be opening up soon, and I think they're going to offer 700 jobs, not insignificant at all, and decent jobs, we understand. We knew also that at least 3 of the 4 properties were saleable to other entities, and they are in various stages of their sale. Atlantic Club, I certainly haven't heard too much from the Philadelphia group who has bought it with their specific plans. Obviously, the Revel is still in a tug-of-war with Glenn Straub and all, and they claim that the deal isn't underwater yet, but they have the right to just to cut it off at any time. The most hopeful, of course, right now is the Showboat, and I know that Stockton is moving forward as quickly as they can, so that by the summer we will see some jobs return there. But I think for most of us, this is happening a little slower than we expected. Since we are a very heavily seasonal business area, we sure had hoped that some of the folks who were going to take these properties would really hustle to get things going by the summertime. And I'm getting less and less hopeful that is going to happen. and so are these workers. So we do have hope. We have real possibilities going here. We are realistic that some of these folks are going to have to go back to jobs under the new ownership that are maybe a little lower in terms of the level of work that they did before and the wages. But these are folks who are willing to do that. These are working people. These are folks who have worked all their lives and struggled to make ends meet and have just met a string of challenges that are unimaginable and that none of us could have guessed. Here's our goal. While we place our hope in the purchase of these properties and the opening of new businesses, and certainly the educational element of the picture with Stockton taking over the Showboat, which is a dramatically new element, I think, in Atlantic City for sure. Our goal, and our goal always was, to do what we could financially to keep these workers who are laid off, and it's not just casino workers. A local economist has told us for every casino job lost, add another half job lost in the county to ancillary services that serve the casino industry, and we've seen that to be true. So if it's 6,000 casino jobs, it's probably 9,000 or 10,000 jobs totally in the area. But as we wait for the hope, with the businesses coming, rebuilding, some new ones starting, we need to keep these skilled workers. These are folks who have skills. They are really the heart and soul of the hospitality industry that has been so much a part of Atlantic City actually throughout its history, but certainly in the casino era for sure. We want to keep their heads above water financially. And we're seeing that is getting more and more difficult because, as Fran said, unlike the first disaster, Sandy, this new disaster, the sudden closing of casinos and the mass layoffs, isn't garnering us the kind of financial support that we had with Sandy. Not even close. We're really struggling to find the finances. But we want to keep their heads above water. We want to keep them as financially stable as we can so they don't all leave the area. We've already lost a lot of residents, and that was understandable. But we're going to need this good, well-trained, and devoted workforce once the businesses start reopening. And the only way to do that is through some direct financial support and assistance to them so that the fright or the worry that was mentioned earlier does not degenerate into dejection, which we're starting to see in some of them, and demoralization, which I think is happening in at least a few people that we meet up with, particularly through the feeding ministries and the work of the community food bank. So we have hope. Business is coming. People are negotiating. Naturally, like all business, they're negotiating for the best deal they can get, and we understand that. We're still very, very hopeful, and there are good signs on the horizon. I think the administration of the city is the right administration to guide us through this. They were very realistic. They have been spot on and present with us in every step along the way to help these folks. But that's our goal. There's hope out there. There's businesses are going to come back. Jobs are going to come back. We need to keep a good workforce as stable and as strong as we can, because we all know that workers who are just totally done in, that workers who are totally financially strapped don't make the best workers. We need a workforce that is strong and stable and knows that there's support for them while they wait to go back to do what they do best, and that is work. These are the folks that we really want to help.
Thank you, Reverend.
There's a future.
Thank you, Reverend. This is it's been quite enlightening. I have to say the numbers are so beyond anything that I think we could fathom. I want to give folks an opportunity, if they've got questions. If you've muted your line, you hit *7 to unmute. Well, I'm going to ask, because in the white paper that you sent us, John, you mentioned about the meeting that you brokered with representatives from federal and state agencies, and that there's some work trying to work with the advocacy efforts around mortgage interest deferment, funds for job training, the earned income tax credit, and at the federal level, emergency food and shelter program funds are being pursued. I'm wondering if there are are the agencies that would be the primary folks for those advocacy efforts and for addressing those, are they all part of the coordinated response team that you put together? Or are there others, or is there information around that would be helpful for the funding community to know?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I can tell you that United Way's role in this is trying to help to lead the conversation in the community and have agencies like we just heard be actively part of the solution. But we're also, through our own connections through board members and other connections that we have, are attempting some advocacy efforts. One example would be Senator Diane Allen, who is a Republican from up in Burlington County, state senator. She has actually put out legislation well in advance of these closings, but it would really pertain to firms that do not file a WARN notice, so they don't give the legal 30-day or whatever the amount is time window that of notifying the workers. So this was a bill that would help to kind of defer the interest that folks would owe on their mortgages, sort of the way a number of college graduates do with their student loans while they're waiting for their incomes to pick up. So they would still, owe the interest. It would just be more also on the back end. So we are working with the Senator's office to get that bill kind of rewritten a little to wrap its arms around the situation here in Atlantic City. So those types of efforts are continuing. We had a great meeting with representatives from the federal and state agencies that were listed on the white paper. And it was really just and Andrea, you were at that meeting, if I recall. There was, a great opportunity for them, sort of like this call, to hear about, firsthand what's happening in the community, what the needs are. And as a result, there was some information that was able to, come back to the group and give us sort of a heads up on these waves of unemployment insurance, when the amounts the benefits are going to stop, so that the community can kind of expect that. And there is on the not specific to our efforts, but our U.S. Senators Menendez, and Senator Booker, along with Frank LoBiondo, our congressman in the Atlantic County area, have been working with government. And you may have, those on the call may have seen the news a few weeks back with a $29 million Department of Labor emergency grant for Atlantic City, and that will help tremendously. It's kind of an employer-based programs that will be helping workers learn new skills for reemployment. So the details of that aren't quite all ironed out yet, but we're hopeful, as the pastor has said, very hopeful for some of these news items that come out like this, and certainly the new businesses that open up, or the companies that have taken over the closed hotels, that with prospects of reopening them for the summertime tourists.
So I think one of the things that would be helpful is if you could send us, and we'll distribute it to everyone, what wasn't in the white paper was the specific on all of those agencies that are part of this coordinated response team. If there's a little bit about who's doing what, if there are some specific services that they're providing, and perhaps how to contact them, I think that would be helpful. If there's, I don't know if there's someone that's taking the lead, for instance, on housing issues, or who's taking the lead on the food issues. The Reverend, and maybe there are a few that's the focus of their work. I guess I just don't, we've got folks that I know in the membership that don't know Atlantic City and don't know Atlantic County that want or may be interested in helping, but they need to understand who the nonprofits are to be in touch with.
Right, and I think one of the things we want to try to drive home in this white paper, and we'll definitely follow up with that information, but one of the points we want to drive home is that, this is a coordinated effort with agencies like JFS and the others mentioned on the phone and in the paper. So, they're on their own, as even Andrea said, bringing to the table what they can, their own resources. Catholic Charities, out raising money to, bring it back to help in the community as part of this collaborative. But we're also looking at, a sort of campaign, if you will, to be able to respond to, as it's identified here, some 400 Atlantic County households. And the Atlantic City Long-Term Recovery Group also has a goal of trying to raise $1.5 million to help some 700 or 1,000 households. So those are, things we're putting in place. United Way's already invested $50,000 into this expanded use of 211 as with a dedicated person who, just to your question, Nina, would, as the Smith family calls, that they're connected with Andrea's agency because she's working in Ventnor, which is where this agency. So sometimes there's a geographic split, sometimes there's a service split.
Right. So, but it's that, so some of the funding that's needed is needed by United Way, some by Jewish Family Services, some by Salvation Army. That's my right.
Correct. If we're leading this cause, the $1 million we as a group are seeking out, that's going to go to JFS. It's going to go to Catholic Charities. It'll be
right. I see. But you're the fiscal. You're like
correct.
The fiscal agent raising that. I see. Okay, that's what I was trying to get at. That would be helpful to have that sort of broken down. I guess in a way so that it's I guess with your contact information and how they can reach you to learn more about that, and then also with Atlantic City with the Long-Term Recovery Group. And I know that there's also with the Long-Term Recovery Group, I know that there is a request that's gone in with relation to the Sandy Long-Term Recovery Groups for Ocean County to serve as a kind of central point because several of the other long-term recovery groups are closing up shop. They're running out of funds, and so that request has gone in, I believe, to the for the third tranche of federal money. I'm just wondering how that plays with this. And maybe
at least at the Atlantic City Long-Term Recovery Group, we were making a kind of a discrimination, even though we're seeing the same clients for different reasons. Still, in order to be faithful to those who might give us funding, we opened a separate account called Together AC for the work with folks due to unemployment versus those we're still dealing with Sandy relief. However, we define both of those as an authentic, according to FEMA description, disaster victims, which is why we feel justified in using the Long-Term Recovery Group as our vehicle. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We don't have to spend any more money putting a new organization together. We've got it all in place. But we've made the discrimination in our accounts that the monies we receive, we will carefully give those out, some as Sandy relief and some as relief due to circumstances or needs from unemployment from the closing of businesses in the Atlantic City area. Right now, we haven't heard much more about the centralized funding through Ocean County, and frankly, we're in trouble there. We really are. The Long-Term Recovery Group office on Thursday will be moving into my church building to reduce our costs until we find other funding for the Sandy work. But in the Sandy work, we've got at least 75 to 100 clients in the pipeline we haven't even talked to yet, and we won't because we don't want to give them false hope until we know we've got some money that we could work with them. We've got other partners to do the work, but we need to do the case management. We need to do the counseling. We need to do all of that kind of stuff. But we're prepared for it. We're just waiting to see if the funding is going to come through in either vein.
Right.
But
right. So that's what you're part of that collaborative effort through the Ocean County.
Yeah.
And you're in the same boat, and that's why it's happening, because except for Ocean County, all the other long-term recovery groups, it's my understanding, are, just about out of funds.
Well, with regard to Atlantic City, there's also an Atlantic County long-term recovery group, which is still hard at work, and actually most of the partners that we're working with on the coordinated response, Jewish Family Service, Catholic Charities, the Salvation Army, they're part of our disaster case management team. I mean, we plan to go until the end of June, and if a client calls 211 and they're a victim of Hurricane Sandy, then they would be disaster case managed appropriately by one of the entities and brought to the disaster case management table. So that work is still ongoing here as well. It's wonderful in a way that the providers are the same because we're already accustomed to working together.
Yeah.
United Way is actually the fiscal agent for the Atlantic County Long-Term Recovery Group.
Great. Questions from any of our folks?
Can I say one other word about the future and the hope? There is another element, another stream that we're seeing. A lot of the folks we're seeing are very experienced now, as I think Fran said. You're talking folks who have 20 years or more experience in hospitality now. And what we're discovering about them is that some of them have gifts, entrepreneurial gifts, that as larger businesses come back to Atlantic City, some of these folks could open the small businesses that support them. And so there is a whole element of this, and I think there are folks trying to pull the local colleges and community colleges into it, that we will provide some training so that some of these folks will not be working for large businesses when things look brighter. They will actually be the business owners in Atlantic City. Taking Atlantic City back to a day when there was a lot more of that in Atlantic City, and things were more prosperous as a result. Kind of giving some of these folks more control over their destiny and using their gifts better as well. So that's another hopeful element for the future as well.
Great, thank you.
If I could add one more piece, and I'm not accustomed to sitting in the seat of not being hopeful and being the gloom and doom. So, but here it goes. Jewish Family Service is also the lead agency on the single point of entry, and I think that is for individuals that are homeless or at risk for homelessness. I think I will get our most recent report. We just have a year under our belt now to Fran. I think those numbers would be really interesting for you all to review as well. The numbers far exceed what we had defined as our outcomes for a year. Some of that relates to the layoffs and other situations, storms, so on, in the area, but I think that would be really helpful just to round out the picture. I do think that, and I appreciate you saying it, that those folks that aren't familiar with our area, that the best, if we can get you more information to understand it, because coming from the Philadelphia or Cherry Hill area, I didn't know a whole heck of a lot about this area, and it really is very different than what is defined as southern New Jersey. So I think that as much as we can provide you to understand our community is really going to be helpful for all of you. So, Fran, I'll get you that information.
Sure.
Pass it along.
I have one last question, I just am thinking, are there programs that you're aware of, federal or state, where there's the potential to leverage for matching, or that if there were some private dollars put towards would help in leveraging government dollars? I don't know if it's thinking in terms of if there's research that's done or pilot projects, and you may not have a sense of that now, but it's something that I would encourage you to think about.
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything at this point in time. This is Fran. I know that at some point we'll get emergency food and shelter program dollars, but that's maybe less than $200,000 in terms of emergency assistance funds.
And they don't require a match?
No, they don't require a match, but it's limited to, for example, 1 month of utility assistance, 1 month of rent, or food, or emergency shelter.
Are you suggesting that if we were to discover some of those, it might help us with the grant makers to loosen up some of the private funds?
Yeah, I mean that's always something that private funders, that's a great role that private philanthropy often plays.
Yeah, because that's an interesting thought for me, because the first place we went to seek the money that was our goal was, of course, the Casino Reinvestment Development Authority, which is a pseudo-governmental kind of entity. And it's not looking real good right now. Of course, that's an upheaval, too, because of the whole political thing in Atlantic City and the governor's summits, and there's all kinds of stories about what's going to happen with CREDA. It's going to change a little bit or a lot or whatever. Nobody knows for sure. But in the past, they have responded to those possibilities of matching funds. And I'm wondering that things aren't looking good right now, that if we went back to them and proposed that if we could find a donor in the private sector, would they put up the money for the challenge? Let me talk. The mayor was actually our upfront person for this. Let me talk to his executive assistant tomorrow and see if that might kind of stoke the dying embers of our request for money. Maybe that would help us and make us.
I wouldn't want you to get false expectations. I just know that as you are looking into potential pots of funding to help support, to just remember that that's, one of the ways philanthropy doesn't have the kind of money, and this is one of the challenges that we face is, even in Detroit's situation, it's vastly different because of the private foundations that are in Michigan with, billions in assets. And in New Jersey, we only have one foundation that has billions in assets. We have a lot of much smaller foundations. So it's a different dynamic that's at play. And, of course, in the Atlantic City area, it's in Atlantic County, it's much smaller. But one of the ways that philanthropy plays a role is by having those, small grants that can leverage other things, or that can, can feed in ways that, for small things, the government may not be comfortable paying for, but that private philanthropy can, and that help flesh out a bigger idea.
All right. Well, I'm going to pursue that because I hadn't thought about that. And you know what? I'm not being. This is not exaggerated exuberance or anything, but as far as we're concerned here, there's no stone unturned.
Right. That's what I figured. So
we have to look at just about everything.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Okay. If any questions? We're just about at the hour then. I want to thank our speakers so much, Fran and Andrea and Reverend, and John for helping us to put this together. We've recorded it, and it'll be available for our members, and I know we did have folks come on, and I suspect that there may be some questions that come in afterwards. It's certainly something that will keep the conversation going here and keep it on the forefront our members' minds as best we can. I would encourage any of our members who are on the call, don't hesitate to be in touch. If you've got questions or want more information, feel free to contact me or Craig, and of course we will send you the contact information for our speakers directly, and the more information that John sends us on the fund that United Way is putting together, and then also on the Atlantic City Together AC fund that way. So if there's nothing else.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. Thank you all for listening in, and we will be in touch.
Great. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Stay warm.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.